I never expected to be invited to Martina's promotion celebration. My future daughter-in-law had made it abundantly clear over the past 2 years that I wasn't part of her vision for my son's life. The invitation arrived via text message, not even a phone call, with a thinly veiled explanation that Daniel had insisted on my inclusion, since he would be away in Germany for 2 critical weeks. Daniel wants you to come since you'll be alone, her message read. Friday 8 p.m. at Eloise. Dress appropriately. Dress appropriately. If I, Dr. Angela Mitchell, former chief of neurosurgery at Boston Memorial, wouldn't know how to dress for dinner at Louise. I smiled to myself, remembering the countless charity galas and medical conferences I'd attended throughout my career. Martina Perez had a peculiar habit of underestimating me at every turn. I selected a simple black dress, with a single strand of pearls, elegant but understated. 58. I had no interest in competing with Martina's inevitable display of designer labels and statement jewelry. My son Daniel always said I had quiet class, a description that pleased me far more than he knew. Daniel called from his hotel in Munich that afternoon. "Mom, are you going to Martina's dinner tonight?" he asked, concern evident in his voice despite the distance. "Of course," I assured him. "I wouldn't miss it. I'm sorry I had to push for this." He sighed. "I know things aren't always easy between you two, but I hate the thought of you alone for 2 whole weeks. My sweet, protective son. 32, he still lived with me not out of dependency, but from genuine affection and concern after his father's passing 3 years ago. Martina resented our close relationship, viewing it as competition rather than the natural bond between a widowed mother and her only child. Daniel, I survived 30 years of neurosurgery and medical missions in conflict zones. I think I can handle one. Dinner with your fiancé, I teased gently. Focus on your project. I'll be fine. After we hung up, I gazed at a photograph of my late husband, James, displayed on my dresser. Wish me luck tonight, I whispered. I might need your diplomatic skills. What I didn't tell Daniel was how much I dreaded this evening. Martina's friends viewed me as relic, the boring American mother-in-law who would soon be relegated to holiday appearances and occasional babysitting duties. What they didn't know, what Martina herself didn't know, was that beneath my unassuming exterior lay experiences and abilities they couldn't begin to imagine. My years of international medical work had required more than surgical skill. I'd learned Spanish during repeated missions to Colombia and Guatemala, French while working with Doctors Without Borders in West Africa, and Italian during a fellowship in Milan. Languages had never been my profession, merely tools necessary for the work that mattered. Called a ride-share service, deciding against driving myself. Something told me I might need a guaranteed exit strategy tonight. As the car approached Eloise, Boston's newest and most exclusive restaurant, I mentally prepared myself for an evening of polite smiles and careful conversation. What I couldn't possibly prepare for was how dramatically this dinner would change everything. Eloise gleamed with understated luxury, all polished brass, dark wood, and ambient lighting designed to flatter even the most discerning clientele. I spotted Martina immediately, holding court at the center of a large table, her glossy dark hair styled in perfect waves, her red dress a deliberate focal point in the muted restaurant. Her expression flickered briefly when she saw me, annoyance quickly concealed beneath a practiced smile. "Angela, you made it," she called out, her voice carrying a forced brightness. "Everyone, this is Daniel's mother." Not my future mother-in-law or even Angela Mitchell. Just Daniel's mother, defined solely by my relationship to her fiancé. Smiled warmly, greeting each person as Martina reluctantly made introductions. Her parents visiting from Miami, 3 friends from her college days, 2 colleagues from her firm, and at the far end, a distinguished-looking man. Introduced simply as Mr. Thompson, our CEO. Pleasure to meet you all, I said, taking the empty seat clearly left as an afterthought between Martina's mother and a college friend whose name I'd already forgotten. Congratulations on your promotion, Martina. Daniel is so proud. She nodded dismissively. He should be here to celebrate it. This account could transform our firm's international presence. Sure he wanted to be, I replied evenly. The aerospace project in Munich is equally important to his career. Martina turned away, effectively ending our conversation as she launched into a detailed recounting of her promotion for those who hadn't heard it yet. I engaged in pleasant small talk with her mother, who seemed slightly uncomfortable, but not unkind. The first subtle shift occurred during the appetizer course. Martina, animatedly describing a challenging client situation, paused mid-sentence and switched to Spanish. She said to her friends, rolling her eyes in my direction, "Music. I have to put up with this old cow all night. Look how she eats, as slow and boring as everything she does." Her friends laughed nervously while her parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. Mr. Thompson, focused on his food, seemed oblivious to the sudden language switch. I simply continued eating, maintaining a pleasant expression. After 30 years of surgery, I'd mastered the art of keeping my face neutral under pressure. Emboldened by my apparent ignorance, Martina continued, switching to Spanish whenever she wanted to make a cutting remark about my appearance, my outdated hairstyle, my boring career. "Suvos mea," she complained during the main course. "Kelowna Chihuahua. Her voice drives me crazy. Squeaky like a chihuahua. I don't know how Daniel stands it." By dessert, she had grown increasingly blatant, describing to her laughing friends how she planned to ensure I would rarely visit once they were married. She declared, "I'll put her in a nursing home as soon as possible. Daniel needs to cut the umbilical cord." Throughout it all, I maintained my composure, engaging politely with others at the table in English, pretending oblivion to the running commentary about me. He noticed Mr. Thompson watching me with an unreadable expression during one of Martina's particularly vicious tirades. Did he understand Spanish too? As the evening wound down and people began gathering their things, I decided the moment had arrived. I stood slowly, ensuring I had everyone's attention. "Martina," I began in perfect Spanish, watching her face drain of color. "Music. Martina, I want to thank you for inviting me tonight. It's interesting that you compare me to a cow, as they represent strength, nourishment, and sustenance in many cultures. Perhaps it's an unintentional compliment." The table fell silent. Martina's mother covered her mouth in shock, switching seamlessly to French. Continued, "Music. As for my Chihuahua voice, these small dogs are known for their fierce loyalty and longevity, 2 qualities I value greatly, especially in family relationships." Martina's friends stared open-mouthed. Her father looked down at his plate. Finally, I shifted to Italian. "Music. Music. A person's true character is rarely revealed when surrounded by those who admire them, but rather when they believe they can belittle others without consequences. My son will choose his own path, but I sincerely hope he finds someone who shows respect, not only when it's convenient but even when they think no one is watching. I return to English for my conclusion. Thank you all for a lovely evening. Martina, congratulations again on your promotion. I'm sure you've worked very hard for it. With that, I gathered my purse and walked out, leaving behind a tableau of shocked faces and absolute silence. Outside in the cool night air, I took my first deep breath in hours as I requested a ride home. Whatever happened next, I knew nothing would be the same again. And strangely, despite the unpleasantness of the evening, I felt lighter than I had in years, as if I'd finally set down a burden I hadn't realized I was carrying. I didn't tell Daniel about the dinner. When he called the next day, I simply said it had been an interesting evening and changed the subject to his project in Germany. He sounded relieved that I'd attended and that there had been no overt conflicts. At least none that I was reporting. Martina didn't contact me at all in the days that followed. I hadn't expected her to. The kind of humiliation she'd experienced doesn't typically inspire immediate reconciliation, especially from someone so image-conscious. I went about my usual routines. Volunteer work at the free clinic, lunch with former colleagues, managing the household in Daniel's absence. 4 days after the dinner, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened it, I found Mr. Thompson, Martina's CEO, standing on my porch, his expensive suit somehow not out of place in my quiet suburban neighborhood. Dr. Mitchell, he greeted me formally. Hope you don't mind my unexpected visit. I asked Martina for your address, though I didn't specify why I needed it. Mr. Thompson, I replied, hiding my surprise. Please come in. I led him to my living room, a comfortable space filled with mementos from my international medical work, a carved wooden statue from Guatemala, textiles from West Africa, a small painting from an Italian patient. Coffee, he offered. That would be wonderful, he nodded. Black, please. When I returned with 2 cups, he was examining a framed photograph of me in surgical scrubs, standing with a team in what was visibly a field hospital. Colombia 2008, I explained, handing him his coffee after the flooding in Antioquia. Impressive, he said, taking the cup. Dr. Mitchell, I'll be direct. Was extremely impressed by your composure and linguistic abilities at Martina's dinner. Our firm is expanding aggressively into international markets, particularly in Spain, France, and Italy. And we're seeking consultants who can help navigate cultural and communication challenges with potential investors. I hadn't expected this turn of events. Mr. Thompson, please call me Richard, he interrupted. Richard, I amended. I appreciate your directness. However, I should clarify that languages have never been my profession. I learned them out of necessity for my medical work. That practical experience is precisely what interests us, he explained. Anyone can learn textbook phrases. You clearly understand cultural nuances and can communicate effectively in high-pressure situations, skills far more valuable than formal language credentials. He outlined a consulting position that would involve accompanying executives to international meetings, helping prepare culturally appropriate presentations and occasionally translating during sensitive negotiations. The compensation would be substantial, he concluded, naming a figure that would indeed be generous for part-time consulting work. I considered his offer carefully before responding. I'm genuinely flattered, Richard, and I sincerely appreciate your recognition of skills that often go unnoticed. However, medicine has always been my calling. While I'm retired from surgery, my volunteer work with underserved Populations remains my passion. He nodded, not seeming particularly surprised by my refusal. I suspected as much but felt the offer was worth making. The way you handled yourself at that dinner with such dignity despite Martina's behavior suggested someone with exceptional character as well as skills. Thank you, I said simply. May I? He ventured whether Daniel knows what transpired that evening. No, I replied, and I don't intend to tell him. That's between Martina and him. Richard studied me for a moment. That's remarkably generous given the circumstances. It's not generosity, I clarified. I've never believed in triangulating relationships. Daniel is an adult who must make his own decisions based on his direct experiences, not on second-hand accounts, even from his mother. We spoke for a while longer about neutral topics, the challenges of international business, my experiences in different countries, Boston's changing landscape. As he prepared to leave, he handed me his business card. My offer remains open should you ever reconsider. And regardless, I hope we might meet again under more pleasant circumstances. I'd like that, I replied honestly. After he left, I wondered briefly if Martina would learn of his visit and what she might make of it. But that concern quickly faded. Had lived too long to worry about the opinions of someone who had shown such poor judgment and character. Little did I know that the real consequences of that dinner were only beginning to unfold. A week passed uneventfully. Daniel called daily from Germany, his excitement about the project evident despite the exhaustion in his voice. I continued my volunteer work at the free clinic, finding comfort in the routine of helping others. Martina remained conspicuously silent. No calls, no texts, not even the pre-functor group messages she occasionally sent when coordinating family gatherings. The silence suited me. I had never sought conflict with my future daughter-in-law, merely a basic level of respect that had consistently proven elusive. Now, with the dynamic between us irrevocably altered, I wondered what would happen when Daniel returned. Would Martina tell him what had occurred? Would she present a sanitized version that cast her in a more favorable light? Or would she, like me, choose to keep the entire incident private? I received my answer on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was preparing dinner when my doorbell rang for the second unexpected time that week. Through the peephole, I saw Carlos, one of Daniel's closest friends since college. Though he hadn't attended the fateful dinner, he was close with several of Martina's friends who had been present. Carlos, I greeted him warmly. What a nice surprise. Coming out of this rain. He stepped inside, removing his wet jacket, his expression uncharacteristically serious. Carlos had always been the light-hearted one in Daniel's friend group, quick with jokes and seemingly incapable of maintaining a somber mood for long. Dr. Mitchell, he began formally, which immediately alerted me that this wasn't a casual visit. I need to talk to you about something important. I led him to the kitchen, where the scent of simmering soup created a homey atmosphere at odds with his evident discomfort. Would you like some tea or something stronger? Perhaps. Tea is fine, he replied, settling at the kitchen island. I can't stay long. As I prepared 2 cups, he gathered his thoughts. I don't know if I should be doing this, he finally said. But I can't not do it either, you know. Whatever it is, Carlos, just say it plainly. I encouraged him. He took a deep breath. Everyone's talking about what happened at Martina's dinner. Wasn't there, but Alex and Sophia were, and they told me everything. He looked up at me, a mixture of admiration and concern in his eyes about what Martina said in Spanish and how you responded in 3 languages. I set his tea before. You see. That's not all, he continued. Martina has been calling everyone who was there, making them promise not to tell Daniel. She's terrified he'll find out what she said about you. This didn't surprise me. Martina had always been meticulous about managing her image in Daniel's eyes. What did surprise me was Carlos's next statement. I'm going to tell him when he gets back, he declared firmly. Daniel's been my friend for 15 years. He deserves to know what kind of person he's planning to marry. I took a thoughtful sip of my tea before responding. May I ask why you're telling me this in advance? Carlos fidgeted with his cup. I guess I wanted to know if you'd object. If you had some reason for keeping it quiet that I'm not seeing. He looked up at me directly. But also to say that I've always thought you were amazing, Dr. Mitchell. Daniel talks about you all the time. Your work, your strength after losing Mr. Mitchell, everything. The way you handled Martina's disrespect, it just confirmed what he's always said. His loyalty to my son touched me deeply. Carlos, I appreciate your concern and your friendship with Daniel. I chose not to tell him because I believe relationships should be navigated directly, not through third-party reports. I paused, considering my next words carefully. However, I won't ask you to keep secrets from him. You must do what your conscience dictates. He deserves better, Carlos said simply. Not just in how his future wife treats his mother, but in the kind of person he shares his life with. Someone who mocks people behind their backs and then tries to cover it up. That's not the partner Daniel needs. I couldn't disagree, though I wouldn't say so explicitly. Daniel is intelligent and perceptive. I've always trusted him to make his own decisions, even when I might have chosen differently for him. Carlos stayed only a short while longer, declining my offer of soup with an apologetic smile. As I showed him out, he turned at the door. Daniel gets back Saturday, right? He nodded. I'm meeting him for basketball Sunday morning, he said, his decision clearly made. Just so you know, after he left, I stood in my quiet kitchen, wondering how this new development would affect everything. I had made peace with not telling Daniel myself, believing that some matters were best left between those directly involved. But I wouldn't ask others to maintain a deception on my behalf. Whatever happened next would unfold according to its own logic. All I could do was prepare myself for the potential storm. The rest of the week passed in a strange suspended animation. I received a formal thank you note from Richard Thompson for meeting with him, along with a generous donation to the free clinic where I volunteered. A gesture that demonstrated both business acumen and personal thoughtfulness. Martina made her first contact since the dinner. A text informing me that she and Daniel would be coming for lunch the day after his return to discuss wedding plans. No acknowledgement of what had transpired. No apology. Not even a hint that anything had changed between us. Just a continuation of her typical presumptuous approach to my time and home. I replied with simple confirmation, adding that I looked forward to seeing Daniel after his 2 weeks away. Her name was conspicuously absent from my expressed anticipation. By Saturday evening, as I prepared for Daniel's return and the inevitable confrontation that would follow, whether initiated by him or by Martina, I found myself strangely calm. Years of making life-or-death decisions in operating rooms and disaster zones had given me perspective. Family drama, however painful, rarely matched the gravity of a hemorrhaging brain aneurysm or a child trapped in earthquake rubble. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same steady hands that had guided me through decades of surgeries. Perhaps, just perhaps, this painful episode would ultimately lead to better outcomes for everyone involved, especially my son. Daniel arrived home late Saturday night, exhausted but exhilarated from his successful project in Germany. I welcomed him with his favorite meal and minimal questions, sensing he needed rest more than conversation. He mentioned that Martina had wanted to meet him at the airport, but he'd insisted on coming straight home to crash in his own bed before seeing anyone else. We're having lunch with her tomorrow after my basketball game with Carlos, he told me, stifling a yawn. She said she texted you about it. She did, I confirmed simply. Everything's arranged. He studied me for a moment with a perceptive gaze. He'd inherited from his father. How was her dinner, really? I maintained my composure. It was revealing, I replied, truthfully. But you should get some sleep. We can talk more tomorrow. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. Daniel left early to meet Carlos, giving me a quick hug and promising to be back by noon for lunch with Martina. Prepared his favorite foods, a habit from his childhood that I'd never outgrown, and set the dining room table. With deliberate calm, uncertain what the coming hours would bring. At 11:45 I heard Daniel's car in the driveway much earlier than expected. The door opened and closed with unusual force. His footsteps, normally leisurely, sounded quick and purposeful on the hardwood floors. "Mom," he called, his voice tight with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. "In the kitchen," I responded, drying my hands on a towel. As I turned to face him, he stood in the doorway, still in his basketball clothes. His expression a complex mixture of anger, confusion, and pain. "I need to ask you something, and I need the absolute truth." I nodded, mentally preparing myself. "Always at Martina's dinner," he began, his voice controlled but strained. "Did she make insulting comments about you in Spanish, thinking you wouldn't understand?" So Carlos had told him. "Yes," I answered simply. "Did you respond in Spanish, French, and Italian, letting everyone know that you'd understood everything?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that it momentarily caught my heart. "Why didn't you tell me?" This was the question I'd been anticipating, the one that required the most careful answer. "Because it was between Martina and me. Because you were focused on an important project thousands of miles away. Because some revelations need to occur directly, not through second-hand reports." "She called you a cow," he said flatly. "Me? Chihuahua." "She told her friend she was going to put you in a nursing home as soon as we were married." His voice broke slightly. "She mocked you all night in front of her family, her friends, even her boss." I moved closer, resting my hand on his arm. "Daniel, and you just sat there taking it until the end of the night," he continued, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Then you responded with more dignity than she deserved." I sighed softly. Dignity was the only appropriate response. Anger would have accomplished nothing. Carlos said her CEO was there, that he understood everything too, and that he looked like he wanted to crawl under the table by the end of your response. Couldn't help a small smile at that image. Mr. Thompson did seem rather disconcerted. He visited me afterward, actually. What? Daniel's surprise momentarily overrode his anger. "He offered me a consulting position," I explained, "working with their international clients." I declined, but it was a thoughtful gesture. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. "So, her boss offered you a job after witnessing her behavior?" He laughed humorlessly. "That's just Perfect. The sound of another car pulling into the driveway interrupted our conversation. Martina had arrived for lunch, unaware that her carefully constructed narrative had already collapsed. Daniel's expression hardened. I need to handle this alone, Mom. Would you mind giving us some privacy? Course, I agreed, understanding his need to confront Martina without my presence complicating matters. I'll go for a walk. Take all the time you need. As I gathered my phone and keys, the doorbell rang. Daniel squared his shoulders visibly, steeling himself for the confrontation ahead. I slipped out through the kitchen door to the garden path, avoiding what promised to be a painful encounter. My neighborhood offered peaceful walking routes lined with old oak trees and well-maintained gardens. I chose the longest path, giving Daniel ample time, while keeping my thoughts firmly in the present, observing spring flowers, greeting neighbors, appreciating the simple pleasure of physical movement. An hour passed before my phone chimed with a text from Daniel. She's gone. Can come home now. When I returned, I found him sitting alone in the living room, staring at the framed photo of the three of us, Daniel, James, and me, taken on Daniel's college graduation day. His expression was somber but composed. I broke the engagement, he said without preamble as I sat beside him. I nodded, neither expressing approval nor offering platitudes. This was his decision and he needed no validation from me. She denied it at first. He continued, said Carlos was lying, that her friends were exaggerating, that you had misunderstood her Spanish. He shook his head. When I didn't believe her, she switched to saying it was just harmless joking that you took too seriously. Common defense, I observed neutrally. Then she cried. Said she was just stressed about the promotion, about wedding planning, about me being away. His expression hardened again. When none of that worked, she got angry. Said that you and I have an unhealthy relationship, that you've manipulated me my whole life, that you deliberately humiliated her to drive us apart. I remained silent, allowing him to process the experience in his own way. The thing is, he said after a moment, even while she was saying all this, she kept speaking to me as if I were a child who couldn't see through obvious manipulation, as if I couldn't recognize exactly what she was doing because I'd never seen it before. He looked up at me, his eyes clear and certain. But I have seen it before. Every time she talked about you when you weren't around, I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. I told her it was over, he continued, that I couldn't marry someone who would disrespect my mother or anyone that way, who would lie so easily, then try to manipulate me when caught. He exhaled slowly. He didn't take it well. I imagine not, I said softly. She said she'd call me when I was thinking clearly again, he added with a grimace, as if this were just a temporary tantrum she needed to wait. We sat in companionable silence for a while, the weight of what had happened settling around us. Finally Daniel turned to me with a curious expression. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me you speak 3 languages fluently? Smiled slightly. For actually, I can manage decent German as well though. It's a bit rusty. He shook his head in amazement. How did I not know this about my own mother? They were just tools for my work, Daniel. Like knowing how to use different surgical instruments, necessary but not particularly noteworthy. I'm starting to think, he said slowly, that there's a lot more to you than I've ever realized. I smiled at my son. This thoughtful man who had just made a painful but principled decision. Perhaps there's more to both of us than Martina ever understood. The following weeks brought a strange new reality. Daniel's broken engagement created ripples beyond our immediate family circle, affecting his social connections, professional relationships, and daily routines. Martina, true to her word, called repeatedly during the first few days. Her approaches cycling predictably through tearful pleas, angry accusations, and calculated reasoning. When none succeeded, she attempted to enlist mutual friends as intermediaries. Efforts that faltered when those same friends had witnessed or heard about her behavior at the dinner. Daniel handled the situation with a maturity that made me quietly proud. He remained firm in his decision while refusing to vilify Martina publicly, simply stating that they had fundamental differences in values that couldn't be reconciled. When pressed for details by well-meaning but curious friends, he would say only that sometimes you see someone clearly for the first time and you can't unsee it. I maintained my own discretion, deflecting questions with practiced ease. This restraint wasn't calculated. I had no desire to fuel gossip or exacerbate an already painful situation. My years in medicine had taught me that dignity often lies in what remains unsaid. Weeks after the broken engagement, Daniel received an unexpected call from Richard Thompson. "Mr. Thompson wants to meet with me," he told me that evening, his expression puzzled. "Martina's boss. He says it's not about her, but he wouldn't elaborate further." "Are you going to meet him?" I asked, curious despite myself. "Think so," Daniel replied. "He's well respected in the industry. Whatever he wants to discuss, it can't hurt to listen." The meeting was scheduled for the following day at Richard's club, the same exclusive establishment where Martina's fateful dinner had taken place. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Daniel returned from the meeting with news that surprised us both. "He offered me a job," he said, still sounding slightly bewildered, leading the engineering division of their new aerospace initiative. It would mean relocating to their Chicago office, but the position is substantial. "That's quite unexpected," I acknowledged, especially given the circumstances. He said it had nothing to do with Martina or the broken engagement, Daniel continued. "Apparently he's been following my work for months. The German project was the final confirmation he needed that I was the right person for this position." Studied my son's expression, noting the mixture of professional pride and personal conflict. "And what do you think?" "The opportunity is incredible," he admitted. "Better than anything I could hope for locally, at least for the next 5 years. But it would mean leaving Boston." I finished for him. "Leaving me?" He nodded, the conflict evident in his eyes. I told him I needed time to consider it. We sat in thoughtful silence for a moment before I spoke again. "Daniel, what would you do if I weren't part of the equation? You were making this decision based solely on your professional goals and personal happiness." He considered this carefully. "I take it," he finally said. "It's exactly the kind of challenge I've been working toward. The team is world-class. The technology is cutting-edge," he sighed. "But you are part of the equation, Mom. Especially now with Dad. I don't want to leave you alone." "I've never wanted to be the reason you limit yourself," I said gently. "Not when you were 18 and considering colleges. Not when you were 24 and debating that fellowship in California. And certainly not now." "It's different now," he insisted. "After Dad died." "After your father died," I interrupted softly. "Grieved. We both did. And having you close during that time was a tremendous comfort." I reached for his hand. "James would be the first to tell you that building your life around protecting me from loneliness isn't what either of us would want for you." Daniel's expression suggested he remained unconvinced. "What would you do if I moved to Chicago?" It was a fair question, one I'd been contemplating since he first mentioned the offer. "Continue my volunteer work at the clinic. I'd perhaps increase my involvement with the Medical Mission Planning Committee. I hesitated, surprising myself with the thought that had suddenly emerged. I might even consider Mr. Thompson's consulting offer if it's still open. Working remotely, of course." Daniel's eyebrows rose. "You do that?" "It would be part-time," I clarified. "And it would allow me to use skills that have been dormant for too long. The clinic work fulfills my need to contribute medically, but the languages, the cross-cultural experience, those have been largely unused since I retired." "You're serious," he said, studying me with new understanding. "I'm considering," I amended. "The point is, Daniel, I have options. I have interests, capabilities, and a support network that extends beyond you." "As it should," he nodded slowly, processing this perspective. "I'll think about it," he promised, "but I won't make any decisions without thorough consideration." 2 days later, an elegant cream envelope arrived by courier. Inside was a handwritten note from Richard Thompson. "Dr. Mitchell, I hope you'll forgive this direct communication. I've recently spoken with Daniel about a position with our firm. A conversation, I assure you, was based solely on his professional qualifications, which are exceptional. I understand his hesitation regarding relocation given your close relationship. While I would never presume to influence family matters, I wanted to reiterate that my offer to you remains open with flexible terms that could accommodate remote work and a schedule of your choosing. Perhaps you might consider visiting our Chicago offices together, allowing both of you to explore possibilities without immediate commitment. With sincere respect, Richard Thompson." The note was thoughtful, strategic, and subtly persuasive, exactly what one would expect from a successful CEO. Found myself smiling at his approach, appreciating both its transparency and its underlying recognition of what truly mattered to Daniel. That evening, I placed the note on the kitchen counter where Daniel would see it when he returned from his run. This wasn't a decision I could or should make for him, but I could ensure he had all relevant information. When he found it, he read it twice before looking up at me. "He's persistent," he observed with a hint of admiration. "He's successful for a reason," I replied. "Good leaders recognize talent and find ways to acquire it." Daniel tapped the note thoughtfully. "Would you consider going to Chicago to look at their operation?" "I would," I answered honestly. "Not because I want to influence your decision, but because I'm genuinely curious about the opportunity he's proposing for both of us." A slow smile spread across Daniel's face. The first unguarded smile I'd seen since the broken engagement. "Then let's go to Chicago." As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself reflecting on the strange, unpredictable path that had led us here. What had begun with Martina's cruel comments in Spanish had somehow opened doors neither Daniel nor I had anticipated. The painful revelation of her true character had freed him from what would have been an unhappy marriage. And perhaps, just perhaps, it had also freed me from the comfortable but limited role I'd occupied since retirement. Sometimes I thought as I drifted toward sleep, the most hurtful moments contain unexpected gifts, not because the hurt itself has value, but because how we respond to it can lead us to places we might never otherwise have discovered. Chicago greeted us with its characteristic blend of Midwestern warmth and urban sophistication. Richard had arranged for a car to meet us at the Airport, a driver who navigated the city's congested streets with practiced ease while pointing out landmarks and neighborhoods we passed. Our accommodations, a sleek two-bedroom suite in a downtown hotel overlooking Lake Michigan, reflected the same thoughtful attention to detail that had characterized all our interactions with him thus far. "This is a bit more elaborate than I expected for a job interview," Daniel observed as we settled into the spacious living area between our separate bedrooms. "It's not just a job interview," I reminded him. "It's a recruitment strategy. There's a difference. You sound like you've been on the other side of this process," he noted with curiosity. I smiled slightly. "I've headed a few recruitment committees in my time. The best surgical talent doesn't just appear at your door. You have to convince them that your hospital offers something unique." I gestured at the impressive view. "The principle is the same, just with different trappings." Our itinerary for the next 2 days was carefully structured yet not overwhelming. Morning meetings at the company headquarters, afternoon tours of residential neighborhoods that might interest Daniel, and evening dinners with key team members he would be working with. For me, Richard had arranged separate meetings with the International Relations Department along with a visit to a free medical clinic similar to the one where I volunteered in Boston to understand the local healthcare landscape, the briefing material explained, and explore potential volunteer opportunities should you decide to relocate. The implication was clear without being presumptuous. They wanted both of us, and they'd thought carefully about what would matter to each of us individually. The company headquarters occupied the upper floors of a gleaming skyscraper in the downtown business district. As we entered the soaring lobby with its marble floors and contemporary art installations, I sensed Daniel's growing excitement. This was a world-class operation, and the opportunity to lead a division at his age represented a significant career acceleration. Richard met us personally, extending the courtesy of greeting me first, despite Daniel being the primary recruitment target. "Dr. Mitchell, I'm delighted you could join us. And Daniel, welcome to what I hope might become your professional home." The morning unfolded with precision. Daniel was whisked away to technical meetings and facility tours, while I was introduced to Helena Vasquez, the Director of International Relations. "Richard speaks very highly of your linguistic abilities and cross-cultural experience," she began as we settled in her elegantly appointed office. "Though I understand your background is in neurosurgery rather than business." "That's correct," I confirmed. "Languages were tools for my medical work, not my primary expertise." "In my experience," Helena replied with a knowing smile, "the most valuable consultants are those who've applied their skills in high-stakes real-world situations rather than theoretical contexts. A surgeon who can explain complex medical procedures to frighten patients in their native language understands communication on a level that most business professionals never achieve." We spent the next 2 hours discussing the company's international expansion goals, the specific cultural challenges they'd encountered, and the role they envisioned for someone with my unique combination of experiences. The position would be part-time and primarily remote with quarterly visits to Chicago and occasional international travel for particularly sensitive negotiations. "We're not asking you to become a full-time business consultant," Helena clarified. "Rather, we'd like access to your perspective and abilities on an as-needed basis. The compensation would reflect the value we place on that access, not the hours worked." It was a thoughtfully crafted proposal that acknowledged my primary commitment to medical volunteer work while offering a new avenue for applying underutilized skills. I found myself genuinely intrigued by the possibility. "We'll need time to consider it," I told her honestly. And naturally, my decision would be influenced by Daniel's. "Of course," she nodded, "though I hope you know that the offer stands independently. Richard was impressed by you before he ever met your son." The scheduled tour of the local free clinic proved equally enlightening. The facility was larger and better equipped than the one in Boston, with dedicated specialists volunteering weekly and a robust program for treating undocumented immigrants who couldn't access traditional healthcare. The medical director, upon learning of my background, immediately outlined multiple ways my surgical expertise and language skills could benefit their patient population. "We have a significant Spanish-speaking community," she explained. "Our French-speaking African immigrant population has grown substantially in recent years. Volunteer physicians who can communicate directly with patients are worth their weight in gold." By the time Daniel and I reconnected for dinner that evening, I had a much clearer picture of what life in Chicago might look like for me. Not just as Daniel's mother who had relocated to be near him, but as a professional with valuable contributions to make in multiple spheres. Daniel's eyes shone with excitement as he described the aerospace division he would potentially lead, the cutting-edge projects already in development, and the team of engineers he'd met. "They're brilliant," he enthused. "Truly world-class, and the resources, Mom, they have testing capabilities I've only dreamed of accessing. The simulation lab alone is years ahead of anything I've worked." But I smiled at his enthusiasm, reminded of James' similar expression when describing a particularly elegant surgical technique or promising research finding. Daniel had inherited his father's passionate engagement with work that challenged his intellect. "And you?" he asked, suddenly remembering that I'd had my own schedule of meetings. "How was your day?" "Surprisingly interesting," I admitted. "The consulting role is more substantive than I expected, focused on specific challenges rather than general translation work. And the free clinic here has resources our Boston facility can only dream about." Daniel studied me with a perceptive gaze. "You're actually considering this, aren't you? Not just for my sake but for your own." "I am," I acknowledged, "though I'm not making any decisions after a single day of meetings." Over dinner with Richard and several key executives, the conversation flowed naturally between business topics and personal interests. I observed the team dynamics with professional detachment, noting how they interacted with Daniel, the respect they showed for his expertise, their genuine interest in his perspectives, the absence of condescension despite his relative youth. Most telling was a brief exchange I overheard between Richard and the chief technology officer when they thought no one was listening. "It was sharper than we expected," the CTO murmured. "Could be running the whole division within 5 years if he delivers." "Exactly why we need him," Richard replied quietly. "And his mother is equally impressive. Different field entirely, but the same analytical mind and ethical core." I pretended not to have heard, but the assessment pleased me, not for the personal compliment, but for the recognition that they saw Daniel for his true potential, not merely as an immediate asset. Our second day followed a similar pattern, with neighborhood tours added to give us a sense of daily life in Chicago. By the time we boarded our flight back to Boston the following morning, both of us had considerably more information than when we'd arrived. No pressure for an immediate decision. Richard had assured us at our final meeting, "Take whatever time you need. Both positions will remain open until you've reached your conclusions." On the plane, Daniel turned to me with an unexpectedly serious expression. Going to take the job, he said quietly. But I need to know honestly. Would you be coming to Chicago because you want to? Or because you don't want me to worry about leaving you alone? I considered my answer carefully, knowing its importance. Both have influenced my thinking, I admitted. I won't pretend your presence in Chicago wouldn't be a significant factor, but the opportunities there, both the consulting work and the medical volunteer possibilities, are genuinely appealing in their own right. I met his gaze directly. I wouldn't relocate my entire life solely to ease your conscience, Daniel. I respect both of us too much for that. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with my sincerity. Then I think we might be starting a new chapter. As our plane descended toward Boston, the city that had been our home for so many years, I found myself filled with an unexpected sense of anticipation. Change at my age wasn't something I'd been seeking, yet here it was. A new city, new professional challenges, new ways to apply skills I'd thought might remain dormant through my retirement years. All because Martina had called me a cow in Spanish, never imagining I would understand every word. Life's turning points rarely announced themselves in events. They arrive disguised as ordinary moments, insults casually delivered, small decisions that cascade into transformative changes. Perhaps that's why resilience matters so much. Not just to weather the painful moments, but to recognize the opportunities hidden within them. The decision to relocate unfolded in practical stages, rather than emotional declarations. Daniel formally accepted Richard's offer, negotiating a start date 6 weeks out to allow for a thoughtful transition. I contacted a respected real estate agent who had helped several of my medical colleagues, arranging to list my house, our family home, for over 20 years by the end of the month. These pragmatic steps somehow made the monumental change feel manageable, breaking an overwhelming life transformation into discrete, actionable tasks. Still, sorting through decades of accumulated memories proved more emotionally taxing than I had anticipated. Do you want to keep Dad's medical journals? Daniel asked one Saturday morning as we tackled James's study, a room I'd largely left untouched since his passing. I ran my fingers along the leather-bound spines, each volume representing years of my husband's meticulous documentation of cases, research findings, and professional observations. No, I finally decided, but they shouldn't be discarded. Contact the medical school library. They maintain archives of distinguished faculty members' papers. Daniel nodded, carefully boxing the journals. And these, he indicated a shelf of framed photographs. James with surgical residence at medical conferences receiving awards. Select a few meaningful ones for yourself, I suggested. I'll do the same. The rest will photograph digitally and let go. We can't bring everything to Chicago. This became our weekend ritual. Systematically evaluating possessions, not just for practical value but for emotional significance. What deserved physical space in our new lives? What could be preserved digitally? What could we release entirely? The process proved unexpectedly liberating. Each decision, each carefully packed box or donation to charity, felt like preparation for something new rather than abandonment of past. News of our impending relocation spread quickly through our respective circles. My medical colleagues expressed surprise tinged with admiration. I never imagined you leaving Boston, Dr. Eleanor Chan, my former surgical resident and now chief of neurosurgery herself, commented over coffee. But then you've always defied conventional expectations. Have I? I asked, genuinely curious about this. Perception. Absolutely, she nodded emphatically. Female neurosurgeon in the 1980s, balancing motherhood with department leadership, pioneering minimally invasive techniques when everyone else was resistant, and now reinventing retirement completely. She smiled warmly. You've been my professional role model for 20 years, Angela. This just confirms I chose well. Daniel experienced similar reactions from his engineering colleagues. Initial surprise followed by understanding once he explained the exceptional opportunity. Several even asked him to keep them in mind if his new division expanded further. Martina, unsurprisingly, had her own response to the news. Daniel received a lengthy email from her 3 days after he announced his resignation at his current firm. She says she's deeply concerned about my decision. He told me that evening, his tone a mixture of amusement and lingering hurt, that it seemed suspiciously hasty following our broken engagement, and that she fears I'm making life-altering choices from an emotional place rather than rational judgment. An interesting perspective, I observed neutrally, continuing to prepare dinner. She also suggests that you've manipulated the situation, using your unexpected language skills to embarrass her, then somehow orchestrating this job offer to separate me from my support network here in Boston. He shook his head in disbelief, as if Richard Thompson, who runs a multi-billion-dollar company, would create an entire aerospace division just to help my mother get revenge. That would be quite elaborate, I agreed, unable to suppress a small smile. The most revealing part, Daniel continued, scrolling through the message, is where she says she's willing to overlook past misunderstandings and reconsider our future together if I'll return to rational thinking and decline the Chicago position. He looked up, his expression hardened as if her conditional acceptance should be incentive to abandon the career opportunity of a lifetime. Placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. She's processing loss in her own way, Daniel. The relationship, the status of being engaged, the future she had envisioned, all gone in an unexpected moment. You're being remarkably generous towards someone who called you a cow, he observed. Wryly. Professional. Detachment, I replied. 20 years of delivering difficult diagnosis teaches you to recognize emotional reactions without absorbing them personally. I paused, considering my next words carefully. Though I will admit, her assessment of my orchestrating abilities is rather flattering. Apparently I could have had a promising career in corporate espionage. Daniel laughed. A genuine, unburdened sound I hadn't heard often enough since the broken engagement. I'm not responding to her email, he decided. There's nothing to be gained from further engagement. A wise approach, I agreed. The house sold more quickly than anticipated. 3 days after listing to a young surgeon and his wife expecting their first child. They loved the established neighborhood, the proximity to the hospital and the home office that had served both James and me throughout our careers. The symmetry felt appropriate. Another medical family beginning their story where ours was transitioning to a new chapter. We found suitable living arrangements in Chicago with similar efficiency. Rather than immediately purchasing new properties, we decided to rent initially. Daniel selecting a modern apartment in a high-rise near his new office, while I chose a comfortable 2-bedroom condominium in a quieter neighborhood. With excellent access to public transportation, close enough for regular visits, yet separate enough to maintain our independent lives. Richard facilitated introductions to Chicago's medical community, resulting in immediate volunteer opportunities at 2 different clinics serving underserved populations. I also connected with the International Medicine Program at Northwestern University Medical Center, where my experience with field hospitals and disaster response proved unexpectedly valuable to their training curriculum. The consulting work with Richard's company began even before our physical relocation. Weekly video conferences with Helena and her international team allowed me to gradually integrate into their operations, providing perspective on cross-cultural communication challenges they were encountering in European and Latin American markets. Your approach is refreshingly different, Helena commented during one session. Our previous consultants focused on terminology and translation accuracy. You immediately identify the underlying cultural assumptions creating the misunderstandings. Medicine teaches you to look for root causes rather than symptoms. I explain the words people choose are often just manifestations of deeper cultural perspectives. 2 days before our scheduled departure from Boston, Richard called with news that surprised both Daniel and me. I've just learned that our Paris office is hosting potential investors from Spain, Italy, and France next month, he explained. Given the sensitivity of these negotiations, I'd like both of you to attend. Daniel, to address the technical questions about the aerospace division. And you, Angela, to assist with the cultural and linguistic nuances, both of us, I clarified, glancing at Daniel, who had looked up from his packing with interest. The aerospace initiative is central to our European expansion strategy, Richard confirmed. And these particular investors have specifically noted their comfort in conducting detailed technical discussions in their native languages. Your combined expertise would be invaluable. After concluding the call, Daniel and I exchanged looks of amused disbelief. Paris, he said, for our first official assignment together. It seems rather cinematic, I acknowledged with a smile. Almost as if scripted. If Martina knew about this, it would absolutely confirm her conspiracy theories. Daniel laughed. My mother, the master manipulator, orchestrating international business trips. Let's add it to my growing list of shadowy accomplishments, I suggested dryly. Right after secretly fluent in multiple languages and covertly influences Fortune 500 CEOs. Our final evening in Boston, after the moving company had taken the last of our boxed possessions, and we were camping in empty rooms with just suitcases and air mattresses, Daniel ordered takeout from our favorite local restaurant. We sat on the floor of what had been our living room, eating directly from containers and sharing memories of the house. Remember when Dad tried to install those bookshelves himself? Daniel asked, gesturing to the now empty wall where James' disastrously uneven attempt had eventually been replaced by professional carpentry. He was so determined, I recalled fondly. 3 advanced degrees could perform microscopic surgery on the human brain, but completely defeated by a level and power drill. He would have loved this, Daniel said after a thoughtful pause. Not just the Chicago opportunity, but seeing you embrace something completely new at this stage of life. He would have been first in line to help pack. Agreed. Your father never feared change. He considered it the only reliable constant in life. As darkness fell on our last night in the house that held so many memories, I found myself filled not with melancholy, but with genuine anticipation. Tomorrow would bring the formal beginning of our new chapter, new city, new professional challenges, new possibilities neither of us had imagined when Martina had issued her ill-fated dinner invitation. To unexpected fluency, Daniel proposed, raising his paper cup of wine in a makeshift toast. And to mothers who continue to surprise their grown children to new beginnings, I added, touching my cup to his, and to the remarkable ways they sometimes find us. Chicago in autumn proved more beautiful than I had anticipated. The vast expanse of Lake Michigan shifted colors with the changing light. Steel gray and early morning, brilliant blue under midday sun, lavender and gold as evening approached. The city itself pulsed with energy that somehow felt different from Boston's more reserved rhythm, broader, bolder, less constrained by tradition and history. Our separate living arrangements worked well for both of us. Daniel threw himself into his new role with characteristic intensity, often working late as he absorbed the complexities of the aerospace division he now led. I established my own routines, volunteer work at the medical clinic 3 mornings a week, consulting sessions with Helena's international team most afternoons, and exploration of my new city during whatever time remained. The promised Paris trip materialized 6 weeks after our relocation. We traveled separately, Daniel departing directly from a conference in Germany while I flew from Chicago, upgrading to business class using points accumulated during my surgical career but rarely utilized. Until now. Richard had arranged accommodations at a discreet boutique hotel near the company's Paris office. Elegant without ostentation, the kind of establishment that catered to discerning business travelers rather than tourists. My suite overlooked a small courtyard garden, providing unexpected tranquility in the heart of the bustling 8th arrondissement. Daniel and I met for dinner the evening before our scheduled meetings, comparing notes on our respective preparations. He had spent the day reviewing technical specifications and investment projections while I had refreshed my French medical terminology, which differed significantly from the business vocabulary I would need for these negotiations. Nervous? He asked as we enjoyed expertly prepared coq au vin at a restaurant Richard had recommended. Appropriately alert, I corrected with a small smile. This isn't brain surgery. No one will die if I conjugate a verb incorrectly. True, he acknowledged, though there are millions of dollars potentially at stake. A different kind of pressure, I agreed. But after decades of life or death decisions, I find financial stakes remarkably less stressful. The following morning brought our first surprise. As we entered the conference room at the Paris office, we were greeted not only by Richard and the expected French executives, but also by a face I instantly recognized despite having seen it only once before. Martina's mother, Claudia Perez, stood conversing with Richard near the refreshment table. Daniel froze momentarily beside me, his professional composure briefly shaken. Placed a steadying hand on his arm, maintaining my own neutral expression as Richard noticed our arrival and approached with Claudia. Angela Daniel, excellent timing, he greeted us warmly. Like you to meet Claudia Perez, CEO of Innovation Global. Her company controls significant aerospace manufacturing capabilities in Spain that could be crucial for our European expansion. Claudia's expression registered momentary shock before smoothing into professional politeness. She extended her hand first to me, then to Daniel. Dr. Michel, Mr. Mitchell, what an unexpected pleasure. Miss, I replied evenly, shifting immediately to Spanish. Music. It's a pleasure to meet you formally. I believe we saw each other briefly at your daughter's dinner a few months ago. Her eyes widened slightly at my direct acknowledgement of our previous encounter. Sí, she responded, maintaining the Spanish conversation. Yes, although we didn't really have the opportunity to talk. Music. I observe time has interesting ways of creating new opportunities. Daniel, whose Spanish was functional but not fluent, extended professional courtesy. In English. Ms. Perez, I look forward to discussing how our aerospace initiatives might align with your manufacturing capabilities. The momentary tension dissipated as Richard guided us toward our seats, apparently oblivious to the undercurrents between us. As the meeting commenced with introductions of the French and Italian investors also present, I caught Claudia studying me with undisguised reassessment. Negotiations proceeded with professional focus, each party presenting their interests and potential contributions to the proposed partnership. When technical discussions began, Daniel took center stage, articulating complex engineering concepts with impressive clarity. I provided occasional linguistic assistance, ensuring that nuanced technical points weren't lost in translation. During a mid-morning break, Claudia approached me as I stood by the window overlooking the Parisian street below. You never mentioned your professional background that night at the dinner, she said in Spanish, her tone carefully neutral. It wasn't relevant to the conversation, I replied. Simply. And I wasn't given much opportunity to share personal information. She acknowledged this with slight nod. Martina told me about your son's new position here. She believes there were unusual circumstances surrounding his recruitment. I met her gaze directly. The only unusual circumstance was Richard Thompson witnessing your daughter's behavior at her celebration dinner. The rest followed natural business logic. Claudia sipped her coffee thoughtfully. I should have intervened that night, she finally said, surprising me with her candor. When Martina began speaking about you in Spanish, it was inappropriate. Yes, I agreed without elaboration. Some acknowledgments require no softening. She inherited her father's temper and my ambition, Claudia continued. Not always a fortunate combination. She glanced toward Daniel, who was engaged in animated conversation with the Italian investors. Your son seems remarkably composed for someone his age. Leading a division of this magnitude is no small responsibility. Daniel has always handled pressure well, I noted. Parental pride evident despite my professional demeanor. He makes decisions based on principles rather than impulse. A valuable quality, she observed, the implication hanging unspoken between us. The afternoon session focused on financial projections and legal frameworks, areas where my involvement was minimal. I observed the interactions with professional detachment, noting how Richard subtly managed competing interests toward a mutually beneficial conclusion. By day's end, a preliminary agreement had been reached with specific technical details to be finalized over the coming weeks. Richard hosted a celebratory dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant near the Arctic Triumph, where conversation flowed more personally now that the business objectives had been achieved. Seated beside Claudia, I found myself engaged in a surprisingly candid exchange about career demands and family relationships. Balancing corporate leadership with motherhood was never simple, she acknowledged after sharing details of her rise through Spain's male-dominated business environment. Perhaps I focused too much on teaching Martina how to succeed professionally, and too little on other values. Parenting offers no perfect formulas, I responded, thinking of my own imperfections as a mother. We all make choices based on what seems most important at the time. Has your son spoken with her since the broken engagement? She asked, her tone carefully casual. Not to my knowledge, I replied honestly. Daniel tends to make clean breaks when trust is damaged. Claudia nodded slowly. A quality Martina might benefit from developing. She hesitated before adding, "She is not handling the situation well. Her professional performance remains excellent, but personally, she seems unable to process what happened." Felt an unexpected twinge of compassion. Despite Martina's behavior, she was still someone's beloved daughter, struggling with consequences she hadn't anticipated. Time often provides perspective that isn't immediately available, I offered. Neither condemnation nor absolution. Perhaps, Claudia agreed, though some lessons are harder to learn than others. As the evening concluded, and we prepared to return to our respective hotels, Richard approached with evident satisfaction. "A successful first collaboration," he observed. "I had a feeling you two would work well together." Daniel and I exchanged a brief glance of shared amusement at his obliviousness to our complicated connection. Sometimes the most unexpected partnerships prove most productive, I replied diplomatically. Later, walking with Daniel along the sand as lights sparkled on the dark water, I shared the essence of my conversation with Claudia. "She seems more self-aware than her daughter," he observed, "though that's a fairly low bar." Clear. Most parents recognize their children's flaws even when they can't fully correct them, I noted. "Did working with her mother create difficulties for you?" "Surprisingly, no," he replied after a thoughtful pause. "Claudia is clearly competent and straightforward. Nothing like Martina in a professional context." He glanced at me with curiosity. About you. Was it uncomfortable navigating that unexpected connection?" It was illuminating, I decided. Seeing the mother helped me better understand the daughter, not excuse her behavior but contextualize it. We stopped at a viewing point overlooking the illuminated Notre Dame Cathedral, its reconstructed spire reaching skyward. After the devastating fire years earlier, life rarely follows expected paths. I mused, gesturing toward the cathedral. Destruction sometimes leads to renewal. Painful endings create space for new beginnings. Very philosophical. "Mom," Daniel teased gently. "Blame Paris," I replied with a smile. City inspires contemplation." As we continued our evening stroll through a city neither of us had expected to be visiting in such a capacity, I reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought us here. Cruel comment in Spanish at a dinner table had triggered a sequence that transformed both our professional trajectories and now improbably placed us in direct business relationship with the mother of the woman who had inadvertently catalyzed everything. If I believed in fate, I might have seen some cosmic symmetry in this development. Surgeon, however, I'd always trusted in cause and effect rather than destiny. The logical progression of events, following initial conditions modified by human choices along the way. Perhaps that was the most important lesson. Emerging from this unexpected chapter, we cannot control all circumstances that affect our lives, but we absolutely determine our responses to them. Martina had chosen cruelty and deception when faced with discomfort. Daniel had chosen integrity when confronted with painful truth. And I had chosen to embrace new possibilities rather than cling to familiar limitations. The outcomes reflected those choices, not cosmic justice but natural consequences, flowing from individual decisions made at critical moments. As we returned to our hotel under a star-filled Parisian sky, I felt profound gratitude, not for Martina's unkindness that had set everything in motion, but for the capacity to transform what could have been merely painful into something unexpectedly valuable. Winter settled over Chicago with characteristic intensity. Biting winds sweeping off Lake Michigan, snow accumulating in crystalline drifts along the streets, the city skyline often shrouded in gray. Yet, I found unexpected beauty in this seasonal transformation, so different from Boston's more moderate winter patterns. By December, both Daniel and I had established comfortable routines in our new environment. Leadership of the aerospace division had begun yielding tangible results with the European partnerships initiated in Paris now formalized into working relationships. My own consulting work had expanded beyond initial expectations, with Helena increasingly relying on my input for sensitive cross-cultural negotiations. The medical clinic where I volunteered had become a meaningful anchor in my week. The diverse patient population, Spanish-speaking families from Mexico and Central America, French-speaking immigrants from West Africa, elderly Eastern Europeans with limited English, provided ample opportunity to use my linguistic abilities for their original purpose, helping people understand complex medical information during vulnerable moments. You're a godsend in this clinic, Dr. Patel, the medical director, told me one afternoon after I'd spent an hour explaining complicated neurological symptoms and treatment options to an elderly Mexican woman and her concerned family. Most of our volunteer physicians can manage basic conversational Spanish, but explaining vestibular disorders and medication interactions, that's another level entirely. It's where medicine and language truly intersect, I replied. Technical accuracy matters, but so does cultural context and emotional nuance. Our first Christmas season in Chicago brought both challenges and unexpected joys. The absence of familiar traditions and locations initially created a sense of dislocation. No Christmas tree shopping at the lot we'd visited for 20 years, no annual holiday concert at the Boston Symphony, no gathering of long-established medical colleagues for our traditional celebration. Daniel and I decided to embrace the opportunity for reinvention rather than attempting to replicate past patterns. We explored Chicago's unique holiday offerings, the magnificent light displays along Michigan Avenue, the German-inspired Christ Kindle Market with its handcrafted ornaments and mulled wine, the spectacular holiday concert at the historic Chicago Theater. This feels different, Daniel observed as we wandered through the festive market one evening, snowflakes gently falling around us. Not better or worse than our Boston traditions, just new. That's the essence of transition, I replied, watching children's faces light up as they discovered the intricate Christmas pyramids and nutcrackers at a German vendor stall, honoring what was while creating what will be. Richard invited us both to the company's holiday gala, an elegant affair at the Chicago Art Institute with the magnificent Thorn miniature rooms specially illuminated for the season. As we entered the Grand Hall, I was surprised to find Helena approaching with a distinguished-looking man I didn't recognize. Angela, I'm delighted you could attend. Greeted me warmly. I'd like you to meet someone I think you'll find interesting. This is Dr. Marcus Rivera, Chief of Neurosurgery at Northwestern Memorial. The distinguished gentleman extended his hand with a professional smile. Mitchell, your reputation precedes you. Helena mentioned you've been consulting with the company while also volunteering at the community clinic. That's correct, I confirmed, immediately assessing him with the instinctive evaluation surgeons develop for their peers. His handshake was firm but not aggressive. His eye contact direct but respectful, positive indicators in my experience. I understand you pioneered several minimally invasive techniques for cranial-based tumors. He continued, your paper on the end-all approach to pituitary adenomas fundamentally changed our procedural protocols here at Northwestern. I was momentarily taken aback that he was familiar with my surgical publications. That research was completed nearly a decade ago. Quality work endures, he replied simply. But brings me to a proposition I'd like to discuss. Our International Neurosurgery Fellowship program is expanding with participants from Spain, France, and several Latin American countries. We've been searching for someone with both the surgical expertise and linguistic abilities to serve as a clinical advisor. I'm retired from surgical practice, I reminded him. This role wouldn't involve performing surgery, he clarified. Rather supervising fellows, reviewing cases, and facilitating communication between international participants and our attending physicians. Your unique combination of neurosurgical expertise and language fluency would be invaluable. Dr. Rivera outlined the position in greater detail. I found myself unexpectedly intrigued. It represented a perfect bridge between my past surgical career and my current language-focused activities, teaching the next generation of neurosurgeons while utilizing the communication skills that had become increasingly central to my professional identity. I'd need to maintain my current commitments, I explained, thinking of both the consulting work and my volunteer clinic hours. We're envisioning this as a part-time position, he assured me. 2 days weekly would be sufficient with flexibility around your other responsibilities. When Daniel joined us moments later, Helena made introductions before tactfully steering Dr. Rivera toward another conversation, giving Daniel and me a moment alone. You look intrigued, Daniel observed perceptively. New opportunity. I explained the fellowship advisory position, surprised by my own enthusiasm as I outlined the possibilities it presented. You should do it, Daniel encouraged immediately. It's perfect. Combining your surgical background with your languages in an educational context. It would mean restructuring my schedule again, I noted mentally. Calculating how to balance multiple professional commitments. Mom, Daniel said with gentle amusement, 6 months ago you were supposedly retired, living a quiet life in Boston. Now you're consulting for an international corporation, volunteering at a medical clinic, and potentially advising neurosurgical fellows at a major teaching hospital. I think you've officially failed at traditional retirement. His observation made me laugh with genuine delight. Your father always said I was constitutionally incapable of true retirement. He predicted I'd find new outlets for my energy rather than actually slowing down. Dad knew you well. Daniel smiled. He'd be thrilled to see you embracing all these new challenges. As the evening progressed, I found myself engaged in stimulating conversations with various colleagues from both Richard's company and Chicago's medical community. The initial awkwardness of being newcomers had faded, replaced by growing connections to our adopted city and its professional networks. Near midnight, as the celebration continued around us, Daniel and I stepped outside onto the museum's terrace for a moment of quiet reflection. Chicago's skyline glittered against the night sky, snow falling gently into the darkness beyond the illuminated space. Hard to believe it's been only 7 months since Martina's dinner, Daniel mused. Sometimes it feels like another lifetime. Perspective changes quickly when circumstances shift dramatically, I observed. The human mind adapts more readily than we often expect. Have you heard anything about her? he asked, surprising me with the question. Nothing directly, I replied honestly. Though Claudia mentioned during a video conference last week that Martina has accepted a position with their Madrid office, apparently she requested the transfer herself. Daniel nodded. Thoughtfully, probably for the best, a fresh start somewhere new. That's something we understand well now, I noted. A comfortable silence settled between us as we watched snowflakes swirl in the light from the terrace lanterns. After a moment, Daniel spoke again, his tone reflective. You know what I realized recently? If Martina hadn't made those comments in Spanish, if you hadn't responded in 3 languages and created that moment of revelation, none of this would have happened. He gestured broadly, encompassing not just the gala, but everything our new lives entailed. Career advancement, your consulting work and medical involvement, our entire Chicago chapter, all stemming from that single catalytic moment. Life's turning points rarely announce themselves in advance, I replied. They often arrive, disguised as ordinary moments or even painful experiences. I wonder if she knows, Daniel mused, how her attempt to mock you secretly ended up transforming both our lives for the better. I doubt she views it through that lens, I said, thinking of what little I knew about Martina's current situation. People rarely recognize their role in others' transformation stories, especially when the narrative doesn't center them favorably. As we returned to the celebration inside, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year. What had begun with cruel words in Spanish had culminated in this moment, standing in one of Chicago's cultural treasures, surrounded by new colleagues and possibilities, my son thriving professionally beside me, both of us engaged in work that challenged and fulfilled us in unexpected ways. The final conversation of the evening came as we were preparing to leave. Richard approached with 2 fluts of champagne, offering a private toast away from the larger gathering. New beginnings and unexpected journeys, he proposed, raising his glass, and to the remarkable ways language can change lives, sometimes through understanding, sometimes through revelation. The knowing glint in his eye suggested he had always been more aware of the Martina connection than he had let on. You knew from the beginning, didn't you? I asked directly about what happened at that dinner. His slight smile confirmed my suspicion. Let's just say I recognize valuable talent when I see it, whether demonstrated through professional expertise or through handling difficult situations with exceptional grace. As Daniel and I shared a taxi home through snow-covered streets, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with endings and everything to do with proper alignment, like a complex surgical procedure where the final suture brings all elements into their correct relationship. Martina had unwittingly given me a gift that evening months ago, not through her intended cruelty, but through creating circumstances that revealed possibilities I might otherwise never have discovered. Her mistake, assuming I wouldn't understand her Spanish insults, had ultimately opened doors for both Daniel and me that we hadn't even known existed. There was a certain poetic justice in that outcome, though I took no pleasure in whatever difficulties Martina might be experiencing in Madrid. True resolution doesn't require another's suffering, only the recognition that our responses to adversity often matter more than the adversity itself. As we arrived at my condominium building, Daniel hugged me good night with unusual intensity. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said softly. "I'm so glad we're here in Chicago in this moment, in this new chapter together." "So am I," I replied with complete sincerity. Every unexpected word of it. 1 year to the day after Martina's fateful dinner, I found myself in an unexpected location, standing before an audience of medical students and international fellows at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, delivering a guest lecture on cross-cultural communication in neurosurgical settings. The fellowship advisor position Dr. Rivera had proposed during the holiday gala had evolved into a more comprehensive role than either of us had initially envisioned, encompassing not just clinical oversight but also formal educational components. The language of medicine is universal in its technical aspects, I explained to the attentive faces before me. But the language of healing transcends mere terminology. Requires understanding cultural contexts, family dynamics, and the unique narratives patients bring to their medical experiences. As I guided these brilliant young surgeons through case studies illustrating how linguistic and cultural awareness could dramatically improve patient outcomes, I felt a deep sense of professional fulfillment, unlike anything I'd experienced since retiring from active surgical practice. This wasn't simply teaching technical skills. It was transmitting wisdom accumulated through decades of practice in circumstances these students could barely imagine. Dr. Mitchell, a Columbia neurosurgical fellow, asked during the Q&A session, "How did you develop such precise medical Spanish? The colloquialisms and regional variations you use when speaking with patients from different Latin American countries are remarkably specific." I smiled, considering how to answer without delving into the complete story that had led me here. "Necessity and immersion," I replied. "Working in field hospitals throughout Central and South America taught me that textbook Spanish wouldn't suffice when explaining complex procedures to frighten patients. Each community has its own vocabulary for describing neurological symptoms. Learning those differences became as important as knowing the proper surgical instruments. What I didn't share was how those seemingly peripheral skills had unexpectedly become central to my current professional identity, or how a young woman's cruel attempt to mock me in Spanish had catalyzed the chain of events leading to this podium. After the lecture, Dr. Rivera joined me for coffee in the hospital's faculty lounge, his expression reflecting genuine satisfaction. "The international fellows can't stop talking about your sessions," he informed me. "We've had renowned neurosurgeons visit before, but never one who could switch seamlessly between 4 languages while maintaining both technical precision and emotional intelligence. It's been surprisingly rewarding," I acknowledged. "Different from performing surgery myself, but fulfilling in ways I hadn't anticipated." "I've been meaning to ask," he said, changing subjects with casual curiosity, "how you connected with Richard Thompson's organization initially. It seemed an unusual transition from neurosurgery." The question caught me slightly off guard. Over the past year, I had developed a standard explanation for my consulting role. A simplified narrative focusing on my international medical experience and language skills, without mentioning the uncomfortable catalyst that had actually initiated the connection. But something about this moment, perhaps the anniversary of that pivotal dinner, perhaps the genuine connection I developed with Drive E. Rivera, as a respected colleague, prompted me toward greater candor. It began with my son's former fiancée insulting me in Spanish at a dinner, not realizing I understood every word I said, surprising myself with the directness of my response. When I responded in 3 languages at the end of the evening, her boss, Richard Thompson, was present and impressed by how I handled the situation. Rivera's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained professionally neutral. "That's considerably more interesting than the typical networking story. Life rarely follows predictable narratives, I observed with a smile. The moments that most significantly alter our trajectories often arrive disguised as entirely different experiences. A philosophy I found repeatedly confirmed in both medicine and life. He agreed. Few transformative moments involve multilingual revelations at dinner parties. His understated humor made me laugh. A genuine, unguarded moment of connection that felt surprisingly comfortable. Dr. Rivera had proven himself a thoughtful colleague over the past months, respected throughout the hospital for both his surgical expertise and his humanistic approach to medicine. At 62, he was close to my own age, a contemporary who understood the medical world as it had evolved through our parallel careers. The hospital's International Program Gala is next month, he mentioned as we finished our coffee. As our fellowship advisor, your presence would be particularly appreciated. Many of our donors specifically support the cross-cultural aspects of our training. I'd be happy to attend, I replied. Should I coordinate with your administrative team regarding expectations? Actually, he said with a moment's hesitation that seemed uncharacteristic for his typically confident demeanor. I was hoping you might consider attending as my guest, rather than in an official capacity. Dinner beforehand, perhaps. The invitation's dual nature, professional and potentially personal, registered immediately. I studied him with careful consideration. This respected colleague, now presenting a possibility I hadn't anticipated. That would be lovely, I decided, surprising myself with how naturally the acceptance came. I'd enjoy the opportunity for conversation outside our usual clinical context. His pleased expression suggested the invitation had indeed carried personal significance beyond professional courtesy. We parted ways shortly afterward, each returning to our respective responsibilities for the day. That evening Daniel joined me for our weekly dinner, a tradition we had maintained despite our separate living arrangements in Chicago. I prepared a favorite pasta dish in my kitchen. He updated me on recent developments with the European aerospace partnerships. The component manufacturing in Spain is exceeding quality expectations, he reported. Helping himself to the salad he brought from a specialty market near his apartment. Claudia Perez personally oversaw the implementation of our specifications, which apparently is unusual for someone at her executive level. She strikes me as quite hands-on for a CO, I observed, remembering my interactions with Martina's mother during various video conferences over the past year. Detail-oriented in a way that reminds me of certain surgeons I've known. Speaking of which, Daniel segued smoothly. How was your lecture today? Full house. Standing room only. Surprisingly, the international aspect seems to have particular appeal for the current generation of medical students. Not surprising, he noted. Medicine is increasingly global, like most fields. As we settled at my dining table overlooking the nighttime panorama of Chicago's skyline, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary changes the past year had brought. Daniel was thriving professionally, having fully emerged from the shadow of his broken engagement to establish himself as a respected leader in his field. My own retirement had transformed into a rich tapestry of meaningful work across multiple domains, utilizing skills both lifelong and newly discovered. Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out? Asked the anniversary date, making reflection inevitable. If that dinner had never happened, or if it had proceeded without incident. Daniel considered this thoughtfully while serving himself pasta. Sometimes I'd likely still be in Boston, possibly married to Martina by now, continuing in my previous role. He shook his head slightly. It's strange to consider that alternate timeline, how something so painful at the moment created space for something so much better. Helena mentioned that Martina has apparently found her footing in Madrid. I shared leading their marketing division for Southern European markets. Good for her, Daniel said without sarcasm. Distance and time provide perspective that proximity often prevents. Indeed, I agreed, thinking of how my own perspective had evolved from that difficult evening to our present reality. Though some lessons are harder earned than others, our conversation drifted to lighter topics. A documentary series Daniel had discovered a new exhibit at the Art Institute. I'd visited plans for the upcoming holiday season now that we had established our own Chicago traditions as we enjoyed tiramisu from our favorite Italian bakery. Daniel studied me with sudden curiosity. Different tonight, he observed, more I don't know, reflective, but also lighter somehow. I hesitated briefly before sharing the unexpected development from earlier that day. Dr. Rivera invited me to the hospital's International Program Gala as his guest. Not just in my professional capacity. Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly, a smile forming. As in a date. That distinction wasn't explicitly clarified. I replied with academic precision that made him laugh. Mom, at your level of professional accomplishment, no one invites you to dinner beforehand unless they're interested in more than your views on neurosurgical techniques. I felt a momentary flutter of uncertainty that seemed remarkably youthful for someone of my age and experience. It's been 7 years since your father died. The idea of personal connections beyond friendship hasn't been part of my consideration set. Dad would want you to be happy, Daniel said gently. Find connection and joy wherever it might present itself. Yes, I agreed, knowing this with absolute certainty he would. As the evening concluded and Daniel prepared to leave, he paused at the door with an expression of genuine contentment. A year ago today, everything seemed to be falling apart. Now look at us. Life's most significant transformations often begin with moments of apparent destruction, I observed. Like forest fires that, while devastating, create essential conditions for new growth. He hugged me goodbye with the easy affection that had characterized our relationship since his childhood. A constant amid all the changes we had navigated together. Later, standing at my living room window, watching Chicago's lights shimmer against the darkness, I reflected on the extraordinary journey from that rainy Boston evening to this moment. Martina's attempt to humiliate me in Spanish had inadvertently opened doors neither she nor I could have possibly anticipated. Professional opportunities, personal growth, new beginnings in unexpected places. Was a profound lesson in this sequence of events, not about revenge or justice, but about how our responses to difficult moments often matter more than the moments themselves. I had chosen dignity over retaliation, clear boundaries over endless conflict, and openness to new possibilities over retreat into familiar limitations. The results of those choices surrounded me now. A fulfilling new professional identity, meaningful work in multiple domains, my son thriving in his career, and perhaps even the tentative beginning of an unexpected personal connection. All because I understood Spanish, French, and Italian, languages learned not for prestige or academic interest, but as practical tools for helping others during their most vulnerable moments. Sometimes the abilities we develop for one purpose reveal their true value in entirely different contexts, and sometimes the Moments that seem designed to diminish us become instead the catalysts for our most significant growth. The story continues in the next chapter in the next linked video. But first, I need you to subscribe to join the family as we are looking forward to hit our first 10,000 subscribers target, and feel free to share your story in the comments. You matter, your voice does too.